Christmas is supposed to be a time of joy and celebration, right? Well, let me tell you about a Christmas Eve that turned into a nightmare. You won't believe it, but it's a true story. It all began with the smell of freshly baked cookies wafting through the air, the twinkling lights on the tree casting a warm, inviting glow, and the laughter of family gathered around a crackling fire. My sister Emma had insisted on hosting this year, and her old Victorian house was the perfect setting for a cozy Christmas celebration. Everything seemed idyllic. My niece Lily was giddy with excitement, her eyes wide as she stared at the beautifully wrapped presents under the tree. The table was set with a mouth-watering feast, and I could almost taste the roasted turkey and rich, creamy mashed potatoes. I even spotted a sprig of mistletoe hanging in the doorway, a cheeky invitation for holiday smooches. As the evening rolled on and the sky outside grew darker, I couldn't help but feel an unease creeping over me. Something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The laughter seemed forced, the smiles painted on, and the eyes of my family held a glint of something I couldn't quite decipher. I chided myself for being paranoid, blaming it on the stress of the season. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an outsider looking in, like I'd stumbled into a family of actors rather than my own flesh and blood. My internal alarm bells went into overdrive when the clock struck midnight, and the doorbell rang. It was an unexpected guest, and I could see the surprise etched on Emma's face as she hurried to answer it. A tall man in a long black coat entered, snowflakes melting in his beard. He was introduced as Mr. Wainwright, an old friend of Emma's, but the man's presence was eerie. His eyes were dark, and he had an unsettling air about him. He brought with him a sense of foreboding, and I could see Emma's unease even as she tried to put on a brave face. The man quickly inserted himself into our celebration, helping himself to the festive spread. He seemed to take an unusual interest in Lily, whispering in her ear and causing her to shrink back in fear. I couldn't stand by and watch any longer, so I excused myself from the table and pulled Emma aside. "What's going on here, Em?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She looked at me, her eyes filled with fear. "I don't know, but there's something terribly wrong. I've never seen this man before in my life, and he's acting as if he knows us intimately." I was about to suggest calling the police when Lily's voice rang out, a terrified scream that pierced the air. We rushed to the living room to find her trembling, her eyes wide with terror. The sinister man, Mr. Wainwright, was clutching her arm. "Let her go," I shouted, my heart pounding. Mr. Wainwright just grinned, his eyes now filled with a disturbing hunger. "You see," he said, "it's time for the reckoning." The room seemed to grow colder as his words hung in the air. My family was frozen in place, as if under some sinister spell. Panic set in as I tried to pull Lily from his grasp, but it was like trying to free a bird from a predator's talons. Just as it seemed our fate was sealed, the grandfather clock in the corner of the room began to chime, the melody drowning out Mr. Wainwright's sinister laughter. Suddenly, the spell over my family was broken, and they rushed to my side. Together, we managed to free Lily from his grasp. With our strength renewed, we confronted Mr. Wainwright, demanding to know who he was and what he wanted. His response was chilling. "I am the spirit of Christmas past, present, and future. I've come to remind you all of the true meaning of this holiday." It was absurd, but his words resonated with each of us. We had allowed the stress, the materialism, and the chaos of the season to overshadow the real spirit of Christmas. We had become consumed by the frenzy of it all, and it took a sinister visitor to awaken us from our holiday stupor. The revelation was a shock, but it was also a wake-up call. The spirit of Christmas wasn't about gifts or elaborate feasts. It was about love, family, and the warmth of togetherness. We spent the rest of the night laughing, sharing stories, and making new memories. As the first light of Christmas morning broke through the windows, Mr. Wainwright stood, his presence fading like a mist, and a sense of peace settled over us. We had been given a rare opportunity to rekindle the true spirit of Christmas, to focus on what truly mattered. That Christmas Eve, as we exchanged heartfelt gifts and held each other close, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn of events. It had been a terrifying night, but in the end, it was a Christmas miracle that brought us back to what the holiday was really about. So, as you celebrate this Christmas, remember to cherish the love, the warmth, and the joy of being with the ones you hold dear. Don't let the chaos of the season overshadow the true spirit of Christmas, because sometimes it takes a bit of horror to remind us of what truly matters during this most magical time of the year. Alright, settle in, because I'm going to give you all the chilling details of that Christmas Eve I'll never forget. It was a few years back. The snow fell gently from the sky, and the streets were aglow with festive lights. I just moved to a new neighborhood, and I was eager to immerse myself in the holiday spirit. So, I decided to take a leisurely stroll through the beautifully decorated streets. The houses on either side of the road were adorned with twinkling lights and wreaths. The sound of carolers echoed in the air, filling the neighborhood with the warmth of the season. But as I walked further down the snow-covered street, I noticed one house that stood out from the others. It was nestled back from the road, partially obscured by overgrown trees, as though it was trying to hide from the world. Curiosity piqued, I made my way toward the mysterious house. My boots crunched in the fresh snow, and a strange sense of foreboding washed over me. I reached the front door, which looked weathered and worn, and I could hear faint whispers coming from within. The door creaked open with eerie ease, as if it had been expecting my arrival. Inside, the atmosphere was chilling, despite the warmth of the season. The whispers were no longer a mere murmur, but had grown into an ominous chant. The words were in an unfamiliar language, cryptic and unsettling. The interior of the house was far from what you'd expect for a typical Christmas celebration. The living room was decorated in a manner that sent shivers down my spine. Twisted, gnarled branches adorned with strange ornaments that seemed to writhe and move adorned the room. The flickering light of candles cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the air was thick with a scent that I couldn't quite place. The chant had grown louder, its hypnotic rhythm drawing me further into the heart of the darkness. My heart raced, but my feet seemed to have a mind of their own, pulling me deeper into the room. The voices of the chanters now rang in my ears, their words growing more fervent, and I found myself unable to move or look away. As I entered the room, a bizarre and terrifying sight greeted me. The figures in the dark, hooded robes surrounded a figure lying on the floor. I couldn't see the person's face, but they lay still, like a lifeless doll. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the chilling scene. In the flickering candlelight, the room seemed to grow colder. I watched, frozen in place, as the figure on the floor began to stir. It was a woman, but her movements were unnatural and jerky, as if she were a marionette being controlled by unseen hands. She was pale as death, her eyes vacant, and her lips parted in a silent scream. Then, she turned her head to face me, and her eyes locked onto mine, sending a shiver down my spine. The whispers of the group grew louder and more frantic, and I knew I had to get out of there before it was too late. I turned to leave, but as I took a step back, my foot caught on a twisted root that seemed to have grown out of the floor. I stumbled and let out a gasp, and that's when the woman's gaze intensified. It was as if she could see straight through me, and I could see a malevolent hunger in her eyes. With a sudden burst of supernatural speed, she lunged at me, her fingers outstretched like claws, aiming for my throat. Panic surged through me as I tried to wrench my foot free from the entangled root, narrowly avoiding her grasp. I bolted for the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers and chants followed me, echoing in my ears as I burst out into the snowy night. I ran through the neighborhood, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until I reached the safety of my own home. I locked the door behind me, trembling as I tried to make sense of what I had witnessed. Who were those people? What kind of dark ritual had I stumbled upon? I couldn't sleep that night, my mind plagued by the disturbing images and sounds. The darkness of that Christmas Eve had left an indelible mark on my soul. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the sinister figures from that night were somehow still lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to finish what they'd started. I questioned my own sanity, unable to share my horrifying experience with anyone, fearing they would think me mad. Just when I thought the horror was over, a letter arrived on my doorstep. A few days later, it was sealed with a dark red wax, and the symbol on it sent a chill down my spine. The letter contained just one sentence: "We know you saw." My heart raced, and I realized that I had unwittingly become a witness to something I should have never seen. These people were not going to let me forget, and they wanted to remind me of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of the holiday season. Now, every Christmas, I can't help but wonder if they're out there, waiting for me to slip up, waiting to finish what they started that fateful night. So, as you celebrate the holiday season, remember that sometimes the most chilling horrors can be found where you least expect them, even in the midst of the most festive of occasions. You won't believe what happened to me last Christmas. You might think that holiday horror stories only happen in movies, but I'm here to tell you that sometimes real life can be just as terrifying. So grab a cup of hot cocoa and settle in, because this story is something straight out of a nightmare. It all began on Christmas Eve, when the air was filled with the scent of cinnamon and pine, and the town square was alive with sparkling lights. My family had gathered for our traditional Christmas celebration at my parents' house. The place was warm and cozy, and the sound of laughter and carolers filled the air. But little did I know that this evening would turn into a chilling nightmare. As the night progressed, the festivities were in full swing. The tree stood tall, adorned with glittering ornaments and twinkling lights, while a roaring fire crackled in the fireplace. We had just finished our hearty dinner, and I felt a mixture of contentment and fatigue settle in. My nephews and nieces were running around, fueled by sugar cookies and excitement. That's when my sister-in-law suggested we take a trip to the local mall, which was famous for its spectacular holiday decorations. I wasn't thrilled about the idea. The mall during Christmas season was like a sardine can filled with people. But I didn't want to be the Grinch, so I reluctantly agreed. The mall was indeed a sight to behold. Massive ornaments hung from the ceiling, and the walkways were lined with life-size toy soldiers and twinkling snowflakes. A towering Christmas tree in the center of the atrium stole the show, its ornaments seemingly the size of small cars. We strolled through the festive crowd, the holiday spirit in full swing. My niece tugged my hand, urging me to take a photo with Santa. "Come on, Uncle," she begged. It's Christmas Eve. I looked over at the long line of parents and children waiting to meet Santa, and I hesitated. My niece's pleading eyes finally convinced me. We joined the queue, and I watched as Santa interacted with the kids ahead of us. He seemed jolly and authentic, listening to their wishes with a twinkle in his eye. When it was our turn, I settled my niece onto Santa's lap while her parents took pictures. I chuckled, thinking about how this Santa must have heard every wish in the book. But as my niece whispered her request, Santa's cheery expression began to change. He looked at her, his blue eyes narrowing, and his lips curled into a sinister grin. I felt a shiver run down my spine. What had my niece said to make him react that way? I leaned in to hear, but the words were barely audible, like a distant whisper in the wind. Santa's voice, once jovial and deep, had turned into a menacing growl. My niece, sensing something was wrong, started to cry. Panic surged through me, and I reached out to grab her. That's when Santa's hand shot out, fingers like iron vices, and clamped around my throat. I couldn't breathe. His icy grip tightened, and I gasped for air, my vision darkening at the edges. The mall around me became a blur of panicked faces, children's screams, and Christmas music turned eerie. In those terrifying moments, I felt the shadow of death creeping closer, and I thought, this is it. This is how I'm going to die. But then, as abruptly as it had begun, Santa released his grip and stumbled back. Shouts and gasps filled the air as a group of shoppers and security personnel descended on him. My family rushed to my side, concern etched on their faces. I could barely speak, still gasping for air, but I managed to whisper, "That's Santa. He tried to kill me." As Santa was led away in handcuffs, I was told he was a temporary hire and had a history of mental illness. Apparently, he had snapped under the pressure of playing Santa, and I had been his target. My mind was a whirlwind of disbelief. I couldn't help but think about how close I had come to meeting my end at the hands of a deranged mall Santa. My niece was shaken, and it took us a while to calm her down. We left the mall and returned home, the events of that evening casting a dark cloud over our Christmas celebration. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me, but then something strange happened. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat by the Christmas tree, contemplating the events of the evening. I couldn't understand why Santa had released me. It was as if something had intervened, something otherworldly. As I sat there in the dimly lit room, a chilling realization struck me. My niece had wished for something very specific from Santa, something that only she and I knew. And it was as if Santa had reacted to that wish, as if he had some knowledge of what she had asked for. The pieces of the puzzle started falling into place, and I realized the horrifying truth. That Santa, that man who had tried to take my life, wasn't just a random deranged individual. He was something else, something dark and malevolent, and he had tried to silence me to protect a sinister secret. My heart raced as I thought about what my niece had wished for and what it might mean. There, in the flickering glow of Christmas lights, I knew that our holiday celebration would forever be haunted by the horror of that night and the chilling plot twist that had unfolded before our eyes. So, as you gather around the Christmas tree this year, remember that not all Santas are as they seem. There may be something lurking beneath that red suit and snowy beard, something far more sinister and horrifying than any holiday nightmare. And who knows, the next time you take a photo with Santa, you might just discover a terrifying secret that will leave you questioning the true nature of the man in red.